All right, welcome back, everybody. We're about to get into another episode of the Hunt Suburbia podcast. I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out to Huntstock. It was a record-breaking year for us. It was the biggest show we'd ever done. We had more than little less than 4,500 people total, and we grew by 76% from last year. So it was a really big show, and thanks to all of you that attended. We're doing some big things. We're going out to Wisconsin next year. We actually just put our dates out for the shows next year. We're on top of things this year. Next year's Massachusetts show, right back at Wildwood Farm, August 7th, 8th, and 9th. And we're going to Wisconsin and Beaver Dam, Wisconsin at Dodge County Fairgrounds. That'll be July 17th, 18th, and 19th next year. And we've got some very large announcements about that show. Should be a great talent lineup and, one for the ages out there as well. But can't say enough great things about this one we just did in Massachusetts. It was incredible. But now let's get into the podcast. I'll tell you guys just a tiny bit what our plans are for the podcast here this fall. We'll have at least 12 to 15 podcasts coming out. I heard from a lot of you at Huntstock. You can't wait for me to put out more consistent podcasts again. Well, we're going to be coming right up. We're going to be putting out consistent podcasts at least once a week. We're going to have a couple legends. We're going to do a lot more of the local stuff, talking about deer strategy in the Northeast, suburban bow hunting, a lot of bow hunting talk. So you're going to get more of that consistency. Huntstock has taken a lot of my time. So I can't, keep that consistency up for the entire year unless I get some help. On that note, if anybody wants to help, if you have any editing skills, if you're filmographer, videographer, but more so just like helping me with the podcast, maybe helping schedule podcasts and even working with the schedule, that would be a big help. Reach out. All right, this podcast here, we're switching it up a little bit. This is not about hunting, but it was filmed and recorded live at Huntstock from this past weekend, and it's a very special guest. Our guest is John Deaton. If you don't know who John Deaton is, he is a Republican. He is a family man. He is a heck of a guy. And he ran against Senator Elizabeth Warren. He ran against her in Massachusetts as the Republican candidate, and he did better against her and better against than any Republicans done against a senatorial Democrat in Massachusetts in 35 years. He's an up-and-coming star for the Republican Party, and it's because he has an incredible story, an absolutely incredible story of overcoming the odds. You have to listen to the whole thing. You won't believe, the hardships he went through and how he got out of it on the other side. And it was truly an honor to be able to introduce him to some people at Huntstock and then interview him about his life and his story and kind of where he stands on policies, because he may be running again the next midterm against Senator Markey from Massachusetts, who has been in Washington for over 50 years. He doesn't know yet if he will be running, although I get a sense that it is a high possibility. So get to know him a little bit on this podcast, learn his story. Hopefully you gain some inspiration from him as well. Share this around with folks. He's a great person. Here he is. My pleasure to introduce him, John Deaton.
Awesome job as always. I actually wanted to introduce you to one of my friends who's a fellow Marine as well.
Oh, I saw the booth over there.
Yeah, the Marines are here, but I want to introduce you to one of my friends. His name's John Deaton. John, come on up here. John is a friend of mine who's a Marine. I just wanted to make that connection between these two legends. Pat's going to do a live Hunt Suburbia podcast in a minute with John. John is he ran actually against Elizabeth Warren, who's someone who's trying to decimate Massachusetts last year. and he did the best a Republican has ever done against a Democrat in, 40 years?
35.
35 years. So he's thinking of going at it again soon. So I want to, build awareness for him and kind of make sure his face gets out there enough so that when people do go to the voting ballots, they understand who he is and what he's about. So momentarily, Pat will come up here, and these guys will, have a little discussion, and you'll learn a little bit more about this gentleman here. So stay tuned.
All right. How's everybody doing? Yeah, having fun at Huntstock? Great. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Suburbia podcast. Today we're interviewing John Deaton. John Deaton ran against Elizabeth Warren and did the best that any Republican candidate has done against a Democratic senator in how many years, John?
About 35.
In 35 years, and he was a first-time candidate. He's got a really interesting life story. We're going to talk about his life story, how he got to where he is, and we're going to also talk a lot about the Second Amendment and the laws that are getting passed in Massachusetts and why we think it's so important that everybody rallies around him just in case you decide to run again.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, John, let's let everybody get to know you a little bit. Where did you grow up, and what was your life like growing up?
Well, I don't have the typical story of a politician. I was born in one of the worst neighborhoods in the country, a place called Highland Park, Detroit. Single mother, welfare, food stamps, born into extreme intergenerational poverty. To give people an example of what poverty can do to a person, my mother is my hero, absolute hero. But I dropped out of high school like everyone else in my family before me. And it was about 3 months I was a high school dropout. And my mother caught me crying. And she said, "Why are you so upset?" And I said, I want to go to college. And to do that, I have to graduate high school. And my mother grabbed her arms around me and said, "Son, I'm sorry, but college just isn't for people like us." That's what poverty had done to her. It stripped her of self-esteem, all her ambitions in life. And on that day, I vowed that I would figure a way out. And I got lucky because a high school principal at a tiny Catholic high school gave me a chance and said, "I'll cut the tuition in half if you play 2 sports and you maintain a high GPA." So at 14, I started 18-hour days, paid myself through high school, went to college, and made it to New England School of Law in Boston, where I graduated and realized that I am the embodiment of the American dream and what's possible in a great country like ours. And so I decided to honor that by joining the Marines, did 8 years in the Marine Corps, and then had lots of debt, got out of the Marine Corps, and for the last 25 years I've been a lawyer in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, representing people who have mesothelioma, which is caused by asbestos, and I've been fighting for them against major corporations until I decided to run for Senate.
That's an incredible story, and I know there is a lot more. Yeah, give it up for John. There's a lot more that goes into it. What are some of the hardships you went through as a kid growing up in a bad neighborhood?
Well, by the time I was 16, I probably was in about 75 fist fights, a couple knife fights. I got shot at. But when I say I grew up in one of the worst neighborhoods, I'm not exaggerating. You can look it up. For the last 50 years, it's ranked in the top 5 most crime-infested neighborhoods in America. Some really bad stuff, to be honest with you. My mother was stabbed when I was 6, and I watched her almost die in the street. She was robbed. Unfortunately, a child predator. I was a victim of child rape for about 2 years, who vowed that if my mother found out, he would kill her. So after watching her almost die, you can imagine what that kind of threat did to a child. And so 17, my best friend died in a drive-by shooting. He died in my arms. So my first day of high school, at the first high school before I dropped out, I had a .38 shoved in my mouth and a hammer cocked because I bumped into, some thug in the school. So some pretty rough stuff. But my hatred of poverty and desire to get out of that environment is what drove me. So when people ask me what caused you to dig in so deep. It honestly is a hatred of poverty, what it did, to my mother, making her think that we were some subclass citizens, that we're just this white trash family from the hood, and that motivated me all these years.
What do you think was the defining moment of your childhood that gave you that drive to get out and succeed? What was the defining? Do you have one defining moment?
Well, the one moment is I wrote a book called Food Stamp Warrior where I talk about this because I learned that it's okay. I put all that trauma aside, and I learned later in life I had money in the bank. I was a good father, unlike my father. I was a success. But then I started having like nightmares about the stuff that had happened to me because I never really dealt with it. So I learned in life, if you don't deal with your shit, if you don't deal with the baggage that you bring, the scars, and you just push it down, later in life it can manifest. And so, but the moment that would probably be two moments. One moment was I was scared to fight because there were these big bullies, and I was a runt of a kid. And when I was in the third grade, I was so scared of a bully that I had to poop. And you don't poop in elementary school. You just don't do it, right? You wait till you get home. But I had to go really bad, and I went in the bathroom, and he was there, and he punched me in the stomach, and I shit my pants in front of the whole school, basically.
Oh, man.
And so after that day, I realized my life was over at 9 years old. I could never go back to school, so I went and got a pair of brass knuckles. I went back to school the next day, and I beat the shit out of the bully. And from that day, I had the desire I would fight anyone, anywhere, anytime. Still got my butt kicked quite a bit, to be honest. But that gave me the will to fight back. That moment and the moment of my mother, putting her arms around me, telling me that college just wasn't for people like us, made me probably the most motivated in my life.
How old were you when you got out of that, all of those hardships and being a thug and being like the people around you? How old were you when you were like, this is it, I'm done with that lifestyle, and now I'm moving on?
17 years old. My friend, he was a mentor. He was 5 years older than me. And to be candid, he was a drug dealer. He sold pot mainly back then, but also a little bit of crack. Because this is the 80s, and the crack epidemic had hit cities like where I grew up pretty hard. He was 5 years older than me, but he protected me. So there were a lot of people who would probably mess with me, kick my butt, maybe whatever. But because I was friendly with him and he sort of protected me, they'd leave me alone. But when he died, he got shot 4 times in front of me. And he died in my arms. I can talk about the rape and not get emotional. I talk about this, I get emotional still 40-some years later because he died in my arms. And so when he died in my arms, I realized that, there has to be a better life than that environment, and that if I ever had children, I would make sure that they would never be subject to the kind of lifestyle that I was subject to.
So let's talk about the steps that you went through after that. You ended up going to college,
Yep.
which your mom said, was just not for people like you. You went to college. Talk about your college experience.
I went to a working class college. I didn't have money, so I had to work through college at Eastern Michigan University, and realized that at that point in time I wanted to become a lawyer because the law impacts every aspect of our life. Hunting license, whatever it is, right? The law is constantly intertwined in our daily lives, and so I got motivated to save money. After college, I worked 2 years as a forklift driver and on the docks and a waiter at night. Saved money, made it to Boston. Came to Boston. I had no connection with Massachusetts except I was a huge Larry Bird fan and the Celtics, and so I wanted out of Detroit. So I came to Boston, went to law school there, and then that's when I joined the Marines.
So what did joining the Marines do for your life?
Gave me discipline, taught me about true honor, integrity, commitment, You know, the core principles of being a Marine is honor, courage, commitment, being able to have someone's life in your hands, your life in their hands. It just gives you a sense of honor and pride and integrity. Never leave a Marine back, never leave a man back or a woman back. I would encourage everyone to join the military at some point, just to give them that kind of discipline in life. You know, it was the opposite of what I experienced as a youth, having no discipline, having no concept of what real integrity and honor was. The Marines helped teach me that, helped teach me to become a man.
But you must have had some instillment of discipline while you were going through college too, though, right? You were disciplined. The Marines probably amplified that for you. But where did you get your discipline from before that?
Work ethic, just it really comes down to that hatred of poverty. My two older brothers, my older sister all dropped out of high school, and my two younger sisters dropped out of high school. All my first cousins dropped out of high school. It was just, you either decide that you're going to break the cycle of poverty, you're going to break the cycle of a deadbeat dad, or you continue that cycle. And for some reason, at some point young in my life, I decided I was going to break the cycle and not repeat it. I can't tell you exactly when, except for, when my mom told me that. It is a big pivotal moment. But when I was interviewed by Fox Business, and they said, what's the number one thing? And I said, I know it sounds crazy, but it's hatred of poverty and what it does to people and how it debilitates the mind and the spirit.
What do you think is the solution for poverty and changing how the inner cities around the country and all of these these dangerous places, if there was any solutions, what do you think they might be?
Well, the first thing is what I believe is one of the biggest single threats to this country is the wealth gap. You have this disparaged difference between the haves and the have-nots. The working class and the middle class have been eviscerated. And so far, if you look at the last 20, 30 years, the people that have done well are the people that have owned things, right? You've owned real estate, you've owned stocks, you've owned, it could be Bitcoin, right? Or it could be any of that. Asset prices have inflated, whereas wages are being taxed so much. We got to get people that are poor, we have to give them access to appreciable assets. But the rules don't allow that. For example, people like Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey, they claim they're for poor people, but they're not, because their policies don't lift poor people up. Giving someone $50 more a month in food stamps is not lifting them out of poverty. Trust me, I was on those food stamps. If you want to lift them out of poverty, you got to change the institutional rules. For example, there's a rule called the accredited investor rule, which doesn't allow a person to own private equity unless they're worth $1 million or more and you can't count your house, or they make $300,000 a year for 3 years in a row. So Nancy Pelosi and all these politicians, they can buy Visa, MasterCard before they go public, right? But regular people can't, because that rule excludes 87% of the American population. Why is that? It's because they want to keep people down, and so we have to change some of these rules that have been in place for so many years.
Yeah, in a sense, some of these social safety nets that are available out there, like welfare and food stamps, and in a sense, it does the opposite of what they're claiming it's going to do. Yeah, you give these the poorest people, a low level of income as a safety net, but that decreases motivation, doesn't it?
It can. Listen, there are some people that need it. It's supposed to be temporary, right? And it's an honorable thing. If someone experiences a catastrophic event in their life, right? The breadwinner dies, and there's 4 children, and child care alone prevents that mom from working because she can't afford, it all go to child care. She can't afford rent. So in situations like that, it's honorable to help Americans. It's honorable to help people
100%.
in those situations. Of course, there are abuses, but the policies have to be able to encourage them to lift them out of those circumstances, not keep them dependent on the government.
Yeah, what are some things that you think could be done as a supplement to that, a policy that could be made that allows them, once that temporary benefit is up, what is something that we could put in place to get them out into a job or get them out into being successful?
Well, one way we have to address it is through tax credits. And the problem right now with the American dream is that a lot of people have been priced out of the American dream. The average home in Massachusetts is $650,000. If you're in the greater Boston area, it's $1 million. Regular people are being priced out of the economy. They're being priced out of the electric bills in Massachusetts is 72% higher than the national average because of the policies. You got someone like Governor Maura Healey who banned two natural gas pipelines, and all these affordable housing units, they won't allow natural gas lines because they're saying we're going to go green. Well, what you're doing is you're causing people that are working people, if people get in their electric bills, they'll see there's a $50 credit, a charge for solar or for offshore wind, yet that person has none. So we've got to fundamentally change the policies that are happening. Massachusetts right now, every single statewide office, we're talking governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, treasurer, auditor, attorney general, is a Democrat, right? The state legislature, 88% Democrat. All 9 U.S. Congress people in the House, Democrats. 2 U.S. senators, Democrats. That's not healthy. I'd say the same thing if they were all like super right, conservatives. It probably wouldn't a good thing. One-party rule is destroying Massachusetts, and so I'm hoping that voters will be tired of what's happening and see that we need some alternatives. I mean, Ed Markey, just so you know, he's been in Washington for 50 years. The average voter in Massachusetts is 39.5 years old. He's been in office a decade longer than the average lifespan of a Massachusetts voter. And he's saying, give him another chance, that he'll be there. And it's not about age. He's 80 years old. It's just a matter of being in Washington for 50 years and then pretending that you can relate to working people. When he went to Washington, tickets at Fenway were $1.25. Okay, just to give you perspective. You could get a college education.
Was Babe Ruth playing at that point?
What was that?
Was Babe Ruth playing on the Sox at that point?
Well, the Sox were still cursed by many, many years. Quite frankly. So, but that just gives you gas was 60 cents a gallon. So he's just out of touch. It's nothing personal, right? It's just you've had 50 years. It's time for somebody with different ideas to have a shot.
So let's say if you ran against him, if you decided to do that, and you won, would you be in there for 2 term limits and then be out?
100%. When I ran against Elizabeth Warren, I said that I put in writing that I would never run a 3rd term. Listen, I don't think you can be in Washington for 50 years and not be a sellout. Period. I don't care who you are. If you've been in Washington for 50 years, you've had to sell your values or compromise your values at some point. So we need term limits. We need single issue bills. So the Ukraine funding bill should be called a Ukraine funding bill. It shouldn't have Ukraine funding, Social Security, some other policy dealing with environment. It should be that one single issue. And if it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But that's what happens in Washington. They'll combine multiple things in one bill and then force people, if you don't vote for it, you're voting against Social Security or something. You know what I mean?
Talking about being a sellout, what did that mean in the hood growing up? Who was a sellout in the hood? What did that mean there?
Well, a lot of people, I'll give you an example. When you're growing up, the last thing you do is like rat. If you got jumped by 3 guys and they beat my ass, if I were to try to get the police involved, right, I'd get my ass kicked a lot worse the next time because I'm trying to rat out. What you would do is you would just sneak up on them and kick their ass when they're not expecting it.
And then now what is a sellout in Washington? What does that mean?
A sellout in Washington is when they put their own personal motivations against the country. It's real simple. Like right now you have Senators Markey and Warren, and they're guaranteed if President Trump, and whether you support President Trump or not, that's not the point, but they're going to vote no matter what. You should have one policy. Is it good for Massachusetts? Is it good for America? If it is, then who gives a shit who the president is? Vote for it. If it's not, then don't. To me, that's simplicity, but they get in there and they become loyal to an agenda or they become loyal to a cause. You know, when Elizabeth Warren debated me, she basically said to everybody, vote for her because she's the Democrat and I'm the Republican. And I was saying, how about we just vote for who's the best candidate, not the Republican or the Democrat. How about, you know, when she stood on the stage, she was a Democrat. When I stood on the stage, I'm an American. Those are two very different things to me.
Last night we built a Native American sweat lodge down there, and I took part in that experience.
Was Senator Warren there?
I was expecting maybe she would show up, but she didn't. But we had a great time in that sweat lodge. It was a really cool experience. But let's talk about now the what would you say are the main issues that Massachusetts is facing right now that we can try to fix?
We got to we got to reform the right to shelter law. The right to shelter law was passed in 1983, and it does not require residency. So when all these illegals show up in Massachusetts, Governor Healy has been putting them up in hotels. So that's free hotels, free dry cleaning, free health care, free Uber rides to your doctor's appointments. They're spending $1 billion per year for the last 4 years on the migrant crisis. At the same time, they allowed Neshoba Hospital in Central Mass to close. They allowed Dorchester's Kearney Hospital to close and said there wasn't any money. Yet they're spending $4 billion on the illegals. So we've got to stop that nonsense. But it's an affordability problem. That housing crisis that I said, this green energy plan that they're talking about, it's all a farce. The Green New Deal, which Markey co-authored, actually does not improve alternative energy. Right? What it does is it subsidizes fossil fuels, but you know, having a multifaceted approach where you have solar, you have not offshore wind because that's terrible, but onshore wind, solar, even limited nuclear. These nuclear modules are the most energy efficient in the world. We got to drive down the price of living in Massachusetts and stop being Taxachusetts. So those are the things that'll help.
Since we're up here at Huntstock on a beautiful farm, you know, this farm in particular is not impacted. But what are your thoughts on how the illegal immigrants in the country do help out on farms? So what are your thoughts about? Is there a hard line? What are some things that maybe we could talk about there?
We got to be common sense. For example, if the first thing you do is if you crossed when I went to the border in May of 2024. And
Southern or northern?
I went to the southern border, Yuma, Arizona, where I was stationed in the Marines. So I went to the Yuma crossing, and the Border Patrol told me that 12 million is the right number. In the 3.5 years of Biden's administration up until that point, 12 million illegals had crossed. So you secure the border. Now, of those 12 million, it's true that, you know, 90% are good people. Right? It's not their fault. They want to come to America, achieve the American dream. I can identify with that. But 10% of 12 million is 1.2 million potential bad guys. You know, people that have committed crimes. So you've got to deport anyone that's come across and committed a felony or violent crime of any nature. We've got to get them out, is one thing. But that doesn't mean you deport someone who came here when they were 5 years old, who's been part of a family farm, who, you know, they may have technically illegal status, but they're paying taxes, they're a good member of the community. So, you know, I look at it, when you say is a bright line rule, anyone here that's been here for 10 years that is productive member of society, that doesn't mean you make them a citizen, but it doesn't mean you necessarily invade the farm and deport them. Anyone in the last 4 years is a different category.
Let's talk about Second Amendment, because that's got to be one of the biggest threats to Massachusetts, I mean, and the country too. But let's talk about your stance on the Second Amendment, and then what Maura Healey signed into law and how that's going to affect everybody.
Well, this is the perfect example of why one-party rule is ruining Massachusetts. If we don't have someone that has a seat at the table, this is what they do. If we just look at the last 2 years, when you have a super majority of Democrats, some that are very far left Democrats, then this is what they do. They wake up one morning and say, you know what we're going to do in Massachusetts today? We're going to eliminate mother and father off birth certificates. And we're going to put, some substitute for mother and father. And there's nobody that can stop it. There's not enough Republicans or independents in the state legislature to change that. It just happens. Then they wake up the next day and say, you know what? We're going to pass a gun law in Massachusetts that is so vague that it acts as a de facto ban to the Second Amendment. We're going to put conditions on new gun purchases that you have to have live fire, training. You have to have this, that, but you don't have the infrastructure in the state to comply. Well, if you can't comply with the law, then you can't buy. That's a de facto ban. And then, of course, Governor Healey signed that into law. It's being challenged by the National Rifle Association and others. I believe it's going to be found unconstitutional. So my position on the Second Amendment is it's in the Constitution. You have a right to bear arms. You have a right to protect yourself. Do I believe in reasonable? Most gun owners believe in reasonable common sense things.
100%.
Right? Most gun owners will say, yes, I believe in a background check, reasonable background check. I believe if you have a felony where you used a firearm in the commission of a felony, there can be restrictions on your Second Amendment right. Most gun owners feel that way. Most gun owners are law-abiding, citizens, though.
How did you escape your childhood without a felony?
That's a great question. I'll let you know on a secret. I got arrested one time. And I got arrested in the most white, privileged neighborhood in the country. It was at a Pop Warner football game, and my girlfriend, I've been with her for 10 years. We have a child. Her ex-husband was doing some stuff, and he actually pushed me and swung at me and all that, and I didn't engage because I was with children. So the first time in my life that someone put their hands on me, I didn't beat his ass. He then called the police and lied and said that I had assaulted him, and they arrested me. It got dismissed right away. But the irony is I had done some things in my life. I sold marijuana. My mother was crying because her food stamps didn't come in, and I didn't want to listen to her cry. So I went across the street. I was 14 years old. I went across the street. I asked my friend, I said, if I sell this bag of pot, how much can I get? He says, I'll give you $50. I catch a bus, I sell it, I take it back to him, the money, he gives me $50. I go down the street to a crackhead, and I say to the crackhead, I got $50 cash, give me $100 in food stamps, and I'll give you this $50 cash. I was hustling at 14, right? And the crackhead who can't buy crack with food stamps says, okay. So I get the $100 in food stamps. I go to my mom and go, Mom, look what I found on the street. Someone dropped their food stamps, and my mother puts a smile on her face, and we get our groceries. So I did, crimes like that, but it's just ironic that later in life I get arrested the first time that I actually show restraint in my life. So just goes to show you that life is got a sense of humor.
Yeah, what an incredible life you've lived, and the fact that you've been able to get out of it, and now you've been successful with your practice. So can you talk about your practice a little bit?
Well, I represent for 30 years shipyard workers, electricians, boiler HVAC people, asbestos insulation workers, people who have been exposed, sheetrockers who put up sheetrock, roofers, laborers, all kinds of trade. A lot of the Navy personnel who were on the Navy ship covered asbestos. So for 30 years, it's been an honor to represent working families against multi-billion-dollar corporations. And so that's another example where these politicians claim that they're for consumers, but they're really not, right? They're in the pocket of these corporations. For example, Elizabeth Warren represented travelers insurance and asbestos. I've been going against travelers insurance for 30 years. So it just shows you that politics, you never pay attention to what they say, pay attention to what they do.
Let's go back to drugs for a second, because you're in the unique position where you lived that lifestyle as a kid. You saw what it can do to communities, and now you're on the other side of it. Is there a drug problem in America, in Massachusetts? What is it doing, and how can we help fight it? What's your stance on the drug problem?
Yeah, it's been big business. Yes, if you look at Quincy, Massachusetts, they have an.
I lived there for a couple of years.
Yeah, they have an opioid problem. Fentanyl is a different drug nowadays. You can't even take a chance. I tell my young daughters, they're in college, I say, listen, when your dad was in college, someone, you're partying, maybe you're tempted to take a pill that's supposed to like speed, give you energy. And I'm telling girls, it's not that I don't want, to make those decisions. You can't trust it now. Everything is laced with fentanyl that's coming over from China. You could lose your life. It's a very different time than it was when I was a kid. So it is a serious problem. Now, I support what President Trump is doing. First of all, illegal crossings are down 93% in America since President Trump got in office. And he's just labeled the drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and he's putting pressure on the Mexican government to help take out the cartels. He's actually talking about using military resources to take out those cartels. And so, yes, if you look at in the last 2 years, we've lost over 1.3 million people due to opiate addiction and opioid deaths. Go down to Mass and Cass in Boston. You will see people publicly shooting heroin on the streets of Boston. Mayor Wu passed out needles to these people, right? We don't want the transfer of AIDS, or we don't want the transfer of other communicable diseases, so we're going to give the addicts clean needles.
Enabling them.
Right. And so you've got to have crime and order. If you look at Boston Common at night now, it's not safe. And also someone, a 5-year-old picked up a dirty needle on Boston Commons. And so we've got to have a law and order back in Massachusetts.
Part of the issue, right, of these inner city neighborhoods, and as you talked about with your mom, they feel like there's no hope. There's no hope at all. There's nothing that you can aspire to do. You wanted to go to college. She didn't believe it was going to be possible, right? Not for people like you. What are some programs that we could, put into these inner cities that can inspire hope, get them off of the drugs and out of the drug game and the hustle lifestyle and all of that stuff? What are some programs maybe that we could do to make that better?
Well, one thing we could do is we could offer tax credits to businesses to go back into the neighborhood. You've got to make it, whether it's new housing or whether it's businesses, you've got to make it economically feasible for them to do it. One way to do that is offer generous tax credits to get business activity into places in Roxbury and Mattapan or Lowell or Lawrence and those cities. If we do that, then that you can give extra tax credits to their charities for places like Boys and Girls Club and things like that. It's one way to do it. Instead, we're seeing the opposite. You saw it in Roxbury 2 years ago. No, it was a year and a half ago. They took the rec center from the poor kids in Roxbury to house the illegal migrants. So one of the few amenities that these poor kids had to go be a part of a sports program, to learn some kind of teamwork and discipline, was ripped from them, and illegals were placed in their place. And so, unfortunately, we have politicians doing the opposite and taking amenities away from them.
Another thing that I notice is, and you used to rap. A lot of people don't know. I used to rap. Pat Burns used to rap. There's something within that culture that makes education or talking in a proper manner and those things uncool in the hood, right? And Charles Barkley talks about it. He deals with it all the time. If you guys know who Charles Barkley is, he you get made fun of almost if you're aspiring to get an education, right? To speak a certain way. You get called certain names and certain terms and ostracized from your community. How could we deal with that? Because I feel like that could change a lot of things too.
Yeah, it's showing kids that, letting them know that, the chances of making it in rap, the chances of making it as a professional football player, the chances of making it as a professional baseball player are almost slim to zero for most people, right? So you have to introduce them to other alternatives. How about wearing a tie? Right? Just having business people come into the community. That's what I meant by these tax credits. If you look at certain neighborhoods, they've just been left to rot in abject poverty, and they've just been abandoned. If you went to my neighborhood where I grew up as a child in Detroit, you would think that you were in Ukraine and a Russian convoy had just went by. The buildings are crumbling. 1 out of 3 buildings are empty. There's potholes in the ground that look like a bomb had cratered them. So we've got to put some investment back into those communities. And you could do that not through government programs, but by incentivizing private businesses to do it. We get the behavior that we incentivize. If the tax code incentivizes people to avoid their taxes, that's what you're going to get. If you incentivize businesses, for example, to build homes, that's what you'll get. And so we've just got to address those issues through incentivization.
What do you think we could be doing better in the education system, particularly in the inner cities?
Well, I support school choice. I believe that the Department of Education needs to be reformed. I don't know if it needs to be totally abolished like President Trump says, but I think it needs to be greatly reformed. And that money, which is billions and billions of dollars going back to the states, and then those states offering vouchers for the parents to make the decision of what's the right school for them, and then offering those tax credits, incentivizations to people in the inner communities to get them to teach there.
How do we, that school of choice is one way to get out of a bad school into a good school, but how do we make those bad schools, like where you went, better?
You got to invest in them, and so the way you invest in them is you've got to get businesses back in those communities. Businesses have left those communities, so you incentivize the businesses to go back into the communities. Then what you end up getting is increasing tax base, your tax base. When you increase your tax base, you have more taxes. You can pay those teachers, and you can pay them more competitively than they're being paid right now.
Got it. So you already told a couple of stories from your high school, but what was it like on a day-to-day basis in the school that you went to?
Well, I was one of 3 whites in the whole school district. So when I say I got my ass kicked a lot, I write in my book.
Is it like Eminem and D'Angelo Bailey?
Nah, I mean, Eminem lived north of 8 Mile. I lived 3.5 miles more in the hood. And so I'll tell you when I didn't come out in public. I don't know if people know this, but there's this show called Roots. Alex Haley wrote the book Roots. Well, back then in the 70s and the early 80s, they would play the miniseries Roots on TV. It was like 5 nights in a row. I would not go outside because even my friends, after they watched that show and they watch, the main character's name is Kunta Kinte, but the slave name is Toby, and they watch him get beat, and they chop half his foot off at one point in the show. So when I'd go out on the street, every black person in the neighborhood wanted to beat my ass because I was white. So on those instances, there were tough days. But like I said, once I learned to fight back, you gain more respect in the neighborhood. And so it was like, we could beat Deaton's ass today, but tomorrow he might snap out of a garbage can with a 2x4 and hit you upside your head. So then I got a little more respect.
It's a war zone, isn't it?
It is. People would be shocked at what goes on in these inner cities and how rough it is. There is a sign 5 blocks from my childhood house that says, "Enter at your own risk. Police do not patrol this area." So, true story.
What were the teachers like in your school?
Terrible. Terrible. Listen, I I got in a fight with my seventh grade teacher because he would call me little honky throughout the whole class constantly. He'd ask a question, I raised my hand. He'd say, "Oh, the little honky's got an answer. He thinks he knows everything." And finally, I ended up having a fist fight with him. So, wow. Yeah.
So let's talk about what are you hopeful for the state of Massachusetts and just in your life in general? What do you feel hope for right now?
My life is blessed now. You know, I've been lucky, but I've also worked my butt off to get to where I am. I'm thinking of running again just because I really do fear that the American dream is dying. For poor people, for regular working class people, I believe that this affordability issue is a real problem. And if you look, you see people like in New York with Zohan Mandami, who is a socialist, some think a communist, who won the Democratic primary. People are starting to turn to these socialistic ideas because they're not participating in the American dream or the American economy because it's just too expensive. 50% of Massachusetts citizens, 50%, don't have $500 in case of an emergency. Their transmission goes. They have a flat tire. They get COVID or something or the flu and they miss work and they're an hourly, they're not salary, they're hourly. Their month is shot. They're behind and it takes them 3 months to make up for a $500 issue. That's a problem, and that is a serious threat to our country and our way of life, in my opinion, and we have to address it.
And let's talk about a little bit about being a dad, and you said, you just wanted to be a good dad, unlike your father.
Yep.
Can you talk about first why your father was a bad dad, and then I want you to talk about what you've been doing with your kids.
Well, my dad was a degenerate gambler, and when I say degenerate gambler, I mean to the nth degree. He made in 1972, they were born from Kentucky. They went up, a loan shark had a contract out on my dad, this before I was born. So he packed up my siblings and my mom, and they went to Detroit because the automotive industry in the 60s was booming. Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, the muscle car era, if you will. And in 1972, my dad made $50,000. $52,000. That's $1,000 a week in 1972.
That's really good,
right? And we were living in that shithole, hellhole, because of his gambling problem. So he abandoned us. So you can't, he was a smart guy. He was a likable guy. But you don't leave your children to live the way we were living while you're making that kind of money, because you have this gambling disease.
That's probably $150,000 in today's money, something like that.
Easy. It was a lot of money back then, for sure, and I wouldn't be surprised if it would be equivalent to like $250 a year. So, I promised another thing: you either break the cycle, you become a dad, and you either become what your dad was, or you make a decision that you're going to be the opposite. My first daughter was born. I was 33 years old, and for the first 9 months, I was scared shitless. I was worried. Am I too selfish? I like to play basketball. I like to golf. I like to do all the things. Am I going to be like my dad and be a selfish prick? Or am I going to, give kids, kids, when you're young, they don't spell love, Love. They spell it Time. Do you spend time with them? Do you make the commitment to be with them? So my daughters were born. I fell in love, and I'm a good dad. When people ask me, "What do you define yourself?" I don't define myself as a lawyer. I don't define myself, as anything other than a dad. That's who I am.
That's great. Well, I think what's one message you want to give to people, and just in case you decide to run against Senator Markey, what do you want to tell the people out there? Your message, your hope for Massachusetts, and what you stand for, what you're going to fight for.
It would be, listen, it's not a presidential year. 2026 is a midterms. So a lot of people don't vote. And if you're tired of a guy like Markey who believes that biological men should compete against girls, he believes in giving citizenship and amnesty to every illegal person in this country. He believes in open borders. He wrote, co-authored the Green New Deal with AOC. If that's what you want, then either don't vote or vote for him. If you want something opposite, if you want common sense, if you want someone to honor the Second Amendment, someone to say, no, we need closed, safe, secure borders in our country. No, if you're born a man, you shouldn't be allowed to compete against girls in sports. If you want that kind of common sense, then please, in 2026, get out and vote.
This episode is brought to you by OnX, the #1 hunting GPS app. The OnX Hunt app has been an invaluable tool in my hunting pursuits, whether I'm hunting, shed hunting, scouting, or e-scouting. To support our show and gain access to the best hunting app out there, use code HS20 when signing up, and you'll get 20% off your plan. I use OnX to mark rub lines, annual scrapes, stand locations, camera locations, and a lot of other points of interest. For shed hunting, I use the tracking feature, which shows me where I have walked in a patch of woods, but more importantly, it shows me where I haven't been, these little pockets of woods I may have skipped over, and that really helps me to find match sheds that I'm in pursuit of. In Massachusetts, we have to be 500 feet away from a dwelling to release an arrow, or a bullet for that matter, so I frequently will use the bubble feature, which you place a waypoint down on a building, and then you can set your radius bubble to whatever your state setback is, and that'll show you where where is off limits to hunt and where you are safe to hunt. There are tons of other features I use daily to help me be more successful, which I'll break down in a later video on my channel. But if you want to give OnX a try, they're a great sponsor. I would recommend supporting them. Go download OnX from the App Store and use code HS20 for 20% off.